An ancient clash between a massive Persian armada poised to crush a tiny Greek resistance changed the course of history. In a narrow strait, against all odds, a cunning plan and a stroke of luck turned the tide in favor of the Greeks. This is the story of the Battle of Salamis, a turning point in the birth of Western civilization. Hi, my name is Sebastian. These are mistakes that changed the world. Once upon a time, from when even the history books have more blank pages than written memories, there was a world you would hardly recognize. 25 centuries ago, the West of those times was divided into two dominant cultures. Ancient Greece, a small collection of fiercely independent city-states, stood in stark contrast to the vast centralized Persian Empire. One championed individual freedom, while the other thrived under absolute rule. It was a clash of ideologies that fueled a bitter conflict which eventually shaped the world we live in today. Despite the fact that there were dictatorial and oppressive city-states in ancient Greece too, such as the all-too-familiar Sparta, even here individual heroism was still honored. Like it or not, this ideological division can still be seen today in the difference between some of the values of the cultures of Iran, Iraq, or other nations descended from the ancient despots, and those of Western culture descended from the Greek traditions. With all that said, let's begin our story. In 480 BC, Xerxes was the ruler of the Persians, the king of kings of the Achaemenid Empire, and he wasn't doing very well. He was in the midst of a war, Persia's second attempt to invade and conquer Greece. One of his goals in the Balkans was to avenge his father's defeat at Marathon. 10 years before, Darius I attempted to invade Greece too, but against all odds, his armies were simply crushed in the Battle of Marathon. On the other hand, Xerxes also wanted to incorporate these shameless and warmongering city-states of Greece into the Persian Empire. The fact that such free city-states existed were both a direct threat, but also a dangerous example for the diverse peoples that made up the empire, especially those of Greek roots. The war had started well, with the construction of a remarkable bridge over the Hellespont, the Dardanelles Strait of today. This bridge is, by the way, still considered one of the greatest engineering achievements of antiquity. The crossing of the strait was followed by the rapid conquest of Macedonia and a number of smaller Greek cities. Then, the army of Xerxes marched south along the coast towards Athens. Often, when it comes to ancient battles, the numbers are exaggerated. In this case, Herodotus tells us that the Persian invaders numbered 1 million or more. Unlikely, but it is possible that the Persian emperor had at his disposal 100,000 to 300,000 soldiers, so at least as many soldiers as the city had inhabitants. Oh, plus a naval contingent of equal size. The Athenians had taken refuge on the islands of the Aegean Sea, many of them on the nearest island, Salamis. The resistance of the few Athenians who had retreated to the city's citadel was crushed without difficulty. After that, the most important and richest city in Greece was burned to the ground. This may have been a belated revenge for the burning of the Lydian capital 20 years earlier. The Greeks, however, although in a dire situation, refused to surrender. The destruction of Athens came only after the Persian army suffered heavy losses at the pass of Thermopylae. That is where 300 Spartans and 6,700 other Greek warriors, mostly Thespians, stood still and met in battle the hundreds of thousands of Persian soldiers. There, according to Herodotus, 4,000 Greeks perished, but they took with them 20,000 Persians. Yes, this is the legendary battle led by the Spartan king Leonidas, where the Greek soldiers fought to the death in one of history's most famous last stands. Such a stubborn and bloody resistance, coupled with major losses, caused morale to plummet among the Persian soldiers, including their generals. Nevertheless, the Persian army continued its march south, where it easily conquered the smaller cities along the coast, all the while being well supplied by a continuous stream of ships from the numerous ports of the empire on the opposite shores of the Aegean Sea. Control of the coast was important because the transport ships were the only way Xerxes could supply his immense army. There was simply not enough food and fodder in all of northern Greece for such a large number of soldiers. The Persians' need to maintain this maritime supply line was probably the only vulnerability that the outnumbered Greeks could exploit. But the gods seemed to be in favor of the Greek side. From the day Xerxes had managed to break through the resistance at Thermopylae, a series of violent storms had swept the Aegean Sea. Because the flow of transport ships and triremes to protect them needed to be as constant as possible, much of the Persian warship fleet was at sea. However, the consequence was that more than a third of the fleet was lost in the storms. Even so, one shouldn't feel too bad for Xerxes. He still had 4 times as many warships as all the Greek cities combined. Things still seemed to be in favor of the Persian emperor. This was the age of galleys, triremes, and larger vessels, and men rode into battle and sank their enemies using massive bronze rams. The Greek city-states had gathered all their ships into a single fleet, totaling 370 triremes, under the command of Themistocles. The vastly larger number of enemy ships meant that a battle in open waters was completely out of the question. So they devised a daring plan. After evacuating their city, they gathered their fleet in the narrow strait of Salamis. Here, their smaller, nimbler ships could exploit the limitations of the Persian armada. But in a purely Greek style, the captains vehemently debated whether to fight or retreat in the hope of a decisive victory on land, which could have come when the Persians faced the much smaller army led by Sparta. This army was preparing to defend the narrow isthmus of Corinth, the gateway to Peloponnesus. The remaining Persian fleet still had over 1,200 triremes with Phoenician, Greek, and Egyptian crews, all experienced in open water battles. But many of these ships were also much larger and thus less maneuverable than the Greek ones, but they often carried twice as many warriors. These additional men represented a significant advantage in situations where the only naval tactics were rowing, ramming, and boarding. In short, Xerxes had every reason to be confident. His fleet was much larger than the Greeks, who were clearly hesitant to engage in a battle on open sea. They seemed to be hiding fearfully in their strait, even as the Persian emperor watched them from the heights nearby. Xerxes was so confident that he had ordered a new throne and instructed his scribes to be ready to immortalize the names of the captains who would distinguish themselves in the inevitable victory. But the emperor underestimated the Greeks. Fueled by arrogance, he fell for a clever ploy. The King of Kings was more concerned about the Greek triremes that might escape from the strait than he was about losing the battle at sea. He anticipated the retreat of the Spartan captains and sent a huge contingent of Egyptian triremes to circle around Salamis to close the back door. Even without these ships, Xerxes had a 3-to-1 advantage in numbers, plus larger ships, plus time, which was on his side. As long as the Greek fleet was blockaded, he could supply his army without enemy interference while continuing to move down the coast of Greece. If he broke through the entrance to the Peloponnese, he might not even need a naval battle. With the Greek fleet caught between the Persian ships, nothing could stop their march, and the Greeks knew it. All Xerxes had to do was wait for the Greeks to come out and watch them being slaughtered. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. A slave named Sicinnus, the personal servant of Themistocles, swam to shore and asked to be taken to Xerxes. He was a deserter. Xerxes received him and questioned the slave. Sicinnus told the emperor that the Greek fleet was in disarray, disorganized, and panicking. The disagreements were so serious that there was a good chance that the largest contingent, that of the Athenians, would soon change sides in the hopes of an imperial clemency and maybe even some good positions in the soon-to-be Persian Greece. Upon hearing such good news, Xerxes chose to change his strategy of waiting for the Greeks to come out, based on the words of this single deserter. Why? God only knows. It's quite clear that Sicinnus was telling the emperor exactly what he wanted and expected to hear. In all fairness, it wouldn't have been the first time that the capricious Greeks had quarreled among themselves, in which case they would indeed have been easy prey. Still, Xerxes' decision to believe Sicinnus was a mistake, one that definitely changed the course of history. The mighty emperor believed it was time to stop waiting and complete his victory while his enemies were divided and unprepared. So the Persian ships were ready to enter the strait the next morning. The problem was that, as you might have guessed, it was all a lie. Sicinnus was not a deserter. He was loyal to Themistocles and shortly after was rewarded and freed by the Athenians. He later opened his own business in Thespia, where he became a full citizen. Xerxes shouldn't have trusted the man, or at the very least, he should have realized he was being tricked when Sicinnus disappeared overnight. But he didn't. Xerxes, swayed by the claims of a runaway slave from the enemy admiral's camp, who then inexplicably vanished, ordered his massive fleet into the confined waters between Salamis and mainland Greece. But instead of being in disarray, every Greek ship was prepared and ready to follow Themistocles' battle plan. With oars almost touching those of the triremes positioned on either side, the Persians entered the Strait of Salamis. And it was a bloodbath, but not the one the Persian emperor expected. Once in the strait, the large Persian ships couldn't maneuver as well as the smaller Greek triremes. Ship after ship, the Persian fleet was hit and sunk. Except for these collisions, the agile Greek ships avoided the Persian ones, making their extra soldiers on board useless. When another line of Persian ships entered the strait, they suffered the same fate. The size of the imperial triremes, which would have been a decisive advantage in open waters, were now a huge disadvantage. Panic seized the Persian forces. Retreating ships in disarray slammed into the support line just entering the battle, leaving them vulnerable to attacks from both sides. So these ships were also hit and sunk by the agile Greek ones. And just by chance, or perhaps a divine intervention by Zeus, a storm miraculously scattered the Egyptian ships that were sent to surround Salamis before they could trap the Greeks in the strait. Over 200 of the best ships of the Persian fleet, thousands of experienced sailors and soldiers, and even Xerxes' brother were lost. Most of the Persian sailors whose ships had been sunk couldn't swim and drowned. Those who did reach the shores of Salamis were killed on the beach by the Greek warriors. The once proud Persian fleet was decimated. Xerxes, forced to watch the carnage unfold from the shore, knew his invasion had failed. Without naval dominance, he could no longer supply his vast army. His plan to conquer Greece was over. But even worse, now controlling the Aegean Sea, the Greeks could head north to destroy the Hellespont Bridge, which was the only way back for Xerxes and his entire army. Leaving a large part of his men in northern Greece, Xerxes let his forces out of the Greek homeland before they starved to death. Those who remained behind were defeated the following year at Plataea. Because he acted on the word of a slave, the Persian emperor basically guaranteed the future independence of Greece. If he had not listened to Sicinnus, Persia would probably have triumphed, and the cradle of Western culture could instead have become an isolated and relatively poor province of an Eastern civilization. But instead, the seeds of democracy, individual freedom, and self-determination nurtured in the independent city-states were allowed to flourish, expand, and develop for the next 2,500 years. The world today reflects a blend of democratic principles, Greco-Roman cultural influences, and Christian theology which was heavily influenced by Greek thought. But all these might simply never have existed if Xerxes wouldn't have made the fatal mistake of believing exactly the wrong man at the wrong time. So, what if the Persians had won? Would Western civilization as we know it even exist? Explore alternate history scenarios and delve deeper into this pivotal battle in the comments downstairs. If you enjoyed this story of underdogs triumphing against overwhelming odds, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of ancient battles, legendary leaders, and the moments that shaped our world. Do remember that there's a Patreon page if you feel like helping this channel out. I'd like to thank my long-standing Patreons, Dan and Lawrence Neal, for their continued support. In the meantime, as always, I do hope to see you next time. Bye.